Good evening, everybody. This is Mr. Hampton coming at you on a Monday night. We are about to start Photoshop tomorrow. So for those of you who are going to be absent, I wanted to actually show you a little bit of background about Photoshop and then also how to work the program so you can get your assignment done. The cool thing about this video, obviously, since it's on YouTube, you can stop, you can pause, you can rewind if you want to, if you feel like you're confused by anything. As always, feel free to ask me questions during class or after our yearbook meeting is over. In any case, for the study guide today, if you look on concept 4, which is our last concept on photography, today we're going to talk a little bit about what is Photoshop and what exactly we use it for in Yearbook. Specifically, we're going to be taking a look at the toolbar and then the layer window. So for those of you with no Photoshop experience, today will be a good day to sort of get into what all these tools do, and then of course how do you move layers, what are adjustment layers, and then eventually we'll move up to layer masking. For the notes, I'm not going to read you the whole thing because you can always just go on my website and look at it at your leisure. But Adobe Photoshop, just a little background here. The original version, we're talking 1.0, released in 1990. This program used to cost around $900 to $1,000, but recently they've come out with the Creative Cloud version, which is CC, and now for about $20 a month you can get it at home. One of the cool things about it is it was actually made for the Star Wars people at Industrial Light and Magic in order to process some of their photos and to get some special effects. It's very commonly used by professional photographers. And one of the things that students usually ask me is, how do I get better? Because Photoshop can be one of these overwhelming things. Just a couple tips for you. Know your keyboard shortcuts. One of the most famous keyboard shortcuts that I always use is Control-Z, which is undo. And if you want to undo multiple times, if you hold Control-Alt and then hit Z, that's step backward, and that'll let you step backward 10 to 20 steps in case you missed a step or made a mistake a couple times ago. You could actually go back and then re-edit it if you want to. YouTube tutorials are really great. Anytime I don't know how to do something, I'll see if it's on YouTube and then I'll follow along with the video. Those of you who really like the Wacom tablets, those are the tablets with a pen. They take a lot of practice, but once you get it down, it makes cutouts easier. Using your own handwriting is also much cooler. So it just depends on how much practice you actually want to put into it. And then, of course, just doing things over and over again, getting used to the flow of opening up an image, editing it in the same way. You'll get faster the more that you practice. So moving on, we are going to take a look at actually Photoshop Live in just a couple minutes. So I'll show you that window later. For your Photoshop examples, you'll see these in class. Photoshop is used for a lot of different reasons. Normally to make people look pretty fake. So if you look over here, it's made somebody a little fatter. Over here, it's made someone a little bit thinner. And this one as well. I'm sure you guys have seen magazine covers where the actual model or the person being photographed looks not really real, but it's hard to tell what exactly they did. Maybe their acne is gone, or they have no pores left. Maybe they've got perfect makeup. A lot of that is Photoshop, and we'll talk about the benefits and limitations of Photoshop in a little bit. Of course, Photoshop is also used pretty negatively, depending on what you want to do to yourself. You got a guy over here with 12-pack abs, it appears. We've got this guy who put on a little bit too much muscle in Photoshop. And then over here, this is pretty common when you see young ladies want to tone down a little bit. They kind of forget the background. So if you notice, you can tell that she's warped herself in to make her waist a little bit tinier, but she's forgotten to adjust the background. So fake Photoshop, very easy to spot. If you're really good at Photoshop, it's very hard to tell what exactly you've edited, and that's kind of what we aim for. Keep in mind, Photoshop used to an extreme level makes it a little bit weird. This is actually a picture of Madonna that was taken a couple years ago. Madonna is no longer in her 30s. Madonna is definitely up there. She was a very, very famous musician back in the 80s and the 90s, and still is today a little bit. But if you look at her photo over here, this was taken raw, straight out of the camera. It doesn't look terrible, but when you're selling an image of being youthful and in with the crowd, this is the final photoshopped image that came out on her CD cover. So if you notice, the difference between them, definitely a couple years taken off. But this one it definitely has that unreal quality to it. You know, nobody really looks like that. So just keep that in mind. Sometimes the more you edit, the more fake something really appears, and that's not really what we're after, especially in yearbook class. Speaking of Photoshop in Yearbook, we use it for a couple different reasons. The first reason is one of my favorite things to do in Photoshop, which is non-destructive editing. Non-destructive editing allows you to edit a photo in selective chunks, and at any time you can go back and just remove those pieces that you put in. And we'll talk about that. It's called layers. Basically, you stack them one on top of the other to add different effects to it. So at any time you can go back, remove those layers, edit them in some way, add other layers to it, and change your image. Second reason, it does handle all of our raw file enhancements. So when you actually go to your raw files, open them up, Photoshop will load, and you can edit your sliders out that way. Big request, number 3 that I usually get is acne removal and skin airbrushing and teeth whitening. For acne removal, just FYI, if someone has a acne mark on their face, let's say a big pimple popped up on their nose, I will airbrush it out for them, especially if it's going to be a big photo in the yearbook. If it's a permanent mark, if someone was born with a birthmark on their face, or let's say a freckle, permanent marks I do not remove because that is part of their character. No matter how much they would beg me to change it or to edit it in some way, it's just not what we do in Yearbook. We're trying to stay accurate to who the person is. Skin airbrushing I will typically do if it's a big photo. I'll do some light airbrushing on it just to kind of remove some of the inconsistencies in the face. Teeth whitening, if you'll notice, if you take pictures of people's faces, their teeth are either a shade of gray or a shade of yellow. That's fairly common, so lightening them up a shade or two is pretty helpful. Some specialized effects, lastly, we do in Yearbook. We do cutouts. That's where you actually cut out the background from somebody. Multiplicity is where you can have multiple copies of yourself in the same photograph, and that's using layer masking, which we'll talk about later. And lastly, color splash, what some of you guys can do on your phone. Photoshop can do a little bit more accurately. Color splash is where you remove all the color from an image and then selectively add it back in. So if you had a picture of a flower and you wanted just the color on that flower, you could do that in Photoshop. And all those pretty much involve layering or layer masking in some way. So as we go throughout the video, just keep in mind, pause it, rewind, watch the other videos, and practice as much as you can. Today we'll be covering a couple different tools, and Photoshop can be overwhelming at first. If you look at each one of these tools, there's about 20 or so, and each one can open up into between 2 and 7 tools inside the actual menu itself. So don't feel overwhelmed. We're just going to concentrate on some of the smaller tools today, the ones that we consistently use in Yearbook. I'll be honest with you, half of the tools on this toolbar I do not use in any way. It just depends on what you do and what field you're in. So today specifically we're going to talk about the Move tool, how to move things, lasso, which allows you to select certain things. We are going to talk about the Marquee tool, which is over here. I don't have it on the list. We are going to talk about the eyedropper tool. We're going to talk about the spot healing tool. We're going to talk about the brush tool, which is definitely a big part of Yearbook class. Your paint bucket tool and your gradient tool, which are combined together. Dodging and burning, which is good for selective highlights or selective shadows you want to add. Text tool, which is pretty big. And then, of course, your color swatches, how to go from foreground color to background color, how to change different hues and saturations of colors. And lastly, we'll talk about the layer window. So, lastly, layers in Photoshop sort of work like sheets of glass. If you had an image and you stacked up sheets of glass one on top of the other, if you're looking at it straight on, you would notice that the image appears to be one cohesive image because you have your background and then all these sheets of glass adding, let's say, different effects or different colors. Photoshop does this very, very well by using layers. As we practice, and as you get better with layers, you'll be able to create more complex images and more complex photo documents as your comfortability comes up with the rest of your skills. And lastly, people always ask me why layers, why does it really matter? Well, when you have layers, we talked about it before, it allows you to do non-destructive editing. You can control effects. We call this opacity of the layers, which is going to be over here on your layer window. So if you really, really like an effect, but let's say it's a little bit too strong, you can actually say, oh, I only want to show about half this effect, and it'll actually scale it back down for you. So for, let's say, skin cleanup, usually when I'm airbrushing someone's skin, I don't want it 100% airbrush because then it has that fake quality to it. So I'll usually airbrush it around 30-35% just to kind of get rid of those inconsistencies in the face and make that person just a little bit cleaner. Sort of like if you woke up and had a perfect skin day and let's say a perfect hair day, that's what we aim for. So nothing too terribly fake, but definitely something that looks realistic. Okay, so last thing that's on here, just understanding about the Photoshop file types. You guys should be familiar already with the two most common file types we use in Yearbook. If you're shooting RAW in your cameras, you're shooting a CR2 format. So when you load that on Photoshop, it's going to open up that RAW processing window. Those of you still shooting in JPEG, nothing wrong with that, but JPEG is the standard. Either way, CR2 or JPEG, they both have to be uploaded as JPEG. CR2s are unreadable by any program except for Photoshop, so make sure that you're exporting those as JPEGs. In Photoshop, though, to have layers in your document, you need to save it as a PSD. For this first assignment that we're working on, you're actually not going to save it fully in PSD. I'm asking for you to just work on it, create the layers, get your assignment done, and then save it as a JPEG. But PSDs are super large files. I've created documents before for my tennis guys, and those files can run about a gig and a half to actually process. So PSDs, very, very large. They have to be converted into JPEGs. But a big thing to understand about converting back into JPEG, you lose all the layers. So let's say you're working with a document, you want to show it to somebody, send it to them. You would save it as a PSD first, so you have your original. Then you would save it as a JPEG, send them the JPEG. If they say, hey, I want this changed around, or I want this changed, you can go back into your PSD document, change layers around, and then export it as a JPEG again, and then send it to them. So having that original PSD, super, super helpful for editing. Okay, without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and load Photoshop, work you through the menu and the different tools, and then we'll go from there. Alright guys, this is part 2 of the video where we're going to take a look at some of the tools with inside Photoshop, how to control them, how to get the options between tools that are sort of buried in the menu. First thing I'm going to do for the sake of today is just tell you about where things are located. Over here on the actual Photoshop window, now keep in mind I'm working on a Mac on CS6, so some of the tools might look a little bit different on yours, but they should be in the same exact location. Okay, so on Photoshop, first thing you're going to notice is up on the actual menu bar itself, you have options for File, Edit, Image, Layer, Type, Select, so on and so forth. For the sake of today, you want to make sure that you have your window and then you have your layers checked off. That means when your document is open, you're going to see a layer window appear over here with all your layers. If you try making layers and moving them around, but you don't have this window available, you won't actually be able to move anything. Over here on the left-hand side, you have your toolbar with all your different tools on it. To get to a tool that's buried in the menu, if you just click and hold with the left mouse button, it'll actually open up the options themselves, and then you can adjust in that way. So let's say, oh, paintbrush tool, I really like that, but I want my pencil tool. You can click and hold that and then get it that way. So in any case, for the sake of today, just to work you through the menu options, I'm going to go ahead and create a new document. So that'll be in File, New. It'll actually pop up a dialog saying how big do you want your image. If it's going to be on the computer, it'll be in pixels. If you know you're working on something for a friend, and let's say it's a big poster, let's say a 24 by 36 image, you can change it to inches that way and increase the size. So for today, I'll just do 1000 by 1000. And for resolution, something that's going to be read on the computer, 72 is the highest you want to go. If you know this is something that you want to print out, you want it to be 300. 300 is full print resolution. Those of you who are shooting on your cameras, if you try loading your image and looking at the resolution of it, it'll be 300 or 299 or 298. It'll be pretty high, which is why images are typically high in quality versus an online image that you'll download from online. So for the sake of today, it's just going to be online we're working with, so I'll go with 72. Background contents, you can tell it to be white, you can select a background color, or you can do transparent images. That's where the background kind of cuts out itself. It's not something we work with in Yearbook very often because we'll do cutouts instead. So we'll go with white, and then we'll say OK. And then there's our image. It's a square 1,000 by 1,000 image. Again, keyboard shortcuts are very helpful. If I make a mistake, I will hold Control, I will hit Z, or I will hold Control Alt and then hit Z to step backward. Another keyboard shortcut that's very helpful for those of you not on a Wacom tablet is the zoom in, zoom out. If you hold Control and then you hit the plus button, it'll actually zoom in, and if you hold the minus button, it'll actually zoom out. So that's kind of just an easy way to zoom in or zoom out. Okay, so let's get to the actual menu itself and our little toolbar. First thing is our actual move tool. The move tool allows you to move selected objects around. So just for the sake of argument, let's say I created a text box over here with my name on it, and let's say I wanted to move that around the image. I would actually click on that move tool, and then I could actually just move that image over there. Okay? The marquee tool allows me to select certain parts of an image. So let's say, oh, I want the H to do something else. I could actually just take my marquee tool, I could go ahead and select that H, and then I could try to move it, but if you notice, it only moves the marquee. And that's because when something is selected, you have to go back to the move tool, and then actually just allows you to move that section that's right there. Oh, you know what? It's not going to let me do that because I have it all as one word. But, hold on one second. Let me flatten out the layer. I know this is a little complicated, but now I can actually move it. Since it's on a separate layer, it wasn't going to let me. Okay, so that allows me to move just this one thing. What I just did was I just compressed everything down on the layer. Once we get to the layer window in a couple minutes, I'll show you exactly what I did. But that'll allow you to actually just move that selective letter. Another helpful little keyboard shortcut is the transform tool. If you hold Control and hit T, it'll actually give you a menu saying what do you want to do with this selection. So sometimes if I want something to be bigger or smaller, I want something to be disproportioned, I can actually take it, drag it up. If you hold the Shift key while you're doing this, it will keep it its original proportion. So if I really wanted that H to be really bit large, and then I could just take it, let's say I could move it right over there, and then there you go. And then once you hit Enter, it actually finishes it, and go back to this marquee tool, unselect it, and then there you go. So those are the first tool. The next tool on the actual toolbar itself is the lasso tool. Lasso tool works just like the marquee tool, but it allows you to select things in sort of an odd configuration. So if I click it, it's going to give me a straight line, and then if I click it again, and then I can just kind of select things as I go. So if I know I need to work, let's say, very, very closely around something, I could do this, and that will allow me to select all of this. Okay, and again, go back to the move tool, and then you can move the whole thing independently. Next tool that you'll see on the toolbar is the quick selection tool. We don't work with this very often in Yearbook because it's not very reliable. What it'll do is it'll try to select what it thinks is a background for you. It's not very accurate, so I would recommend that you don't use it. We do not use the crop tool at all. The eyedropper tool is really, really cool because it allows you to select exact colors. So, for example, if you had an image open and you said, oh, I really like the green in this girl's dress, and I want text to match that color. You could actually hit the eyedropper tool, and you would just select, and then if you notice, it actually gives you like a little window here saying, oh, this is the actual color itself, and then it'll actually adjust that color down there in your color palettes. So this black, if I really wanted this black color, I could actually just select it, and it would say, oh, you know, that's the actual color itself. Let me get off this for a second. There we go. And then it would actually select those colors itself. So all these kind of being like shades of gray or shades of black, it'll actually just allow me to eyedrop that color right there. Okay? Oh, my bad. The last time I loaded this, I had an average sample size, so it's averaging white with black. That's why it's turning out gray. So if I go by point sample, okay, there you go. So there's my straight up white color, and then if I select this, there's my straight up black color. Okay, next thing is the Spot Healing Brush Tool. Spot Healing Brush Tool is great for acne removal. It gives you a little bit of a point, and you can adjust the size of this point if you want. And what it allows you to do is if you actually just kind of make it the same size as a pimple, as long as there's clean skin around it, as soon as you hit it, it'll kind of average out, you know, actual pixels themselves, and it'll kind of blend the skin together for you. So if I got somebody with a pimple, somebody with, let's say, a tattoo, you can use the spot healing brush tool pretty easily. If you click and hold on it, it'll give you other options that you use. The healing brush tool, it allows you to select manually the area that you want to use. I typically don't use that, so I recommend you don't. Patch tool allows you to make a, let's say, a modification where you want to actually fill in an area with something else that's around it. So let's say I had a tree right here. I could like select that tree and say, hey, that tree, I want to replace it with this grass, you know, that's over here. And what it'll do is it'll actually patch that area for me, so it'll kind of duplicate it. So if I want to get rid of a tree, let's say there's a distracting element in my photograph, the patch tool is really great for that. Brush tool works just like a paintbrush does. You have options that are up here. The default option is going to be this brush right here. The default size, if you increase the pixels, it makes the brush larger. By the way, if you don't see the brush, that's because you have the caps lock key pressed. When the caps lock key is pressed, this is what it'll show you, so it won't look like you're changing the size at all. But as soon as you hit that caps lock key, it'll actually show you the relative size of the brush. So in this, you can adjust brush size. If you have low hardness, it means it's going to feather itself out, just like this. If you have it turned all the way up, it's going to make a really, really hard line. And then, of course, somewhere in between, about 50% or so, produces something sort of in between. So it just depends on what you want to use it for. To adjust the color of it, we would actually go to this little color palette down here. The foreground color is the one that it's going to set. The background color is the one that you just keep in the background. You can switch them pretty easily by just using this little flip tool. But if I wanted to change it from black, I could click on it. It's going to give me a whole bunch of color pickers. I can use this slider that's over here, say, oh, I really want, let's say, this purple color right here for my brush. And then I could do that, and then there is my purple color. You can also change the opacity. If you go down with it, it's going to notice how it kind of blends together. It kind of makes it a little bit more opaque. You can also change the flow if you want to. Turn this back up. The flow means it doesn't go out kind of in the same way. It kind of goes a little bit stuttering or so. And if you have a pen tool, like you're using your Wacom tablet for, it'll be a little bit more accurate. Next tool, clone stamp tool, we do not use. History brush tool, we do not use. The eraser tool works just like an eraser. It will erase. Now keep in mind, if you got a background of white, you can always paint with a white brush, and that'll work the same way. As long as your flow and your opacity is all the way up, and you make a big enough brush, it'll work just like an eraser. Okay? Next thing is your gradient tool. By default, it's the gradient. If you click and hold on it, there's also a paint bucket tool. Paint bucket tool works just like paint bucket in the paint program. Whatever color that you're on, and you click on that window, it'll go ahead and be that color. Let's say, for example, you wanted just a select area. Marquee tool, go with that area, back to the paint bucket tool. Let's say I want my purple for this one, and then there you go. Now the cool thing is this gradient tool. Gradient tool, up here in this little dialog window, it'll give you options for what it thinks that you want to do. But if I click on one and double click on it, it'll actually pop up a dialog window saying, okay, what colors do you want a gradient to? So in this one, it's defaulting between my foreground and my background color from purple to blue. But let's say I really, really like a different color here. I'm going to double click on this, and then I'm going to set it to, oh, come on. Let's see if I can get this thing to load. Let's see. I always love live videos because you can never tell what's going to work and what's not going to work. So let's see, gradient, yes, and yes. Okay, there we go. I guess it's the bottom one. Okay, so I select that, and let's say I really, really like a green, and let's say this bottom one, I really, really like a red, sort of Christmas colors, and then I'm going to hit OK. Now on the gradient tool, if you notice, it doesn't really give you anything to tell you what to do. You want to click and hold and drag out, and then the longer line that you have, the softer the gradient is going to become from one color to the other. So from this one to that one, you got that nice sort of burnt orange that's in there. If I went really, really small, it would be a really, really harsh line. And the line works opposite to the direction that you want to go with the gradient. So for example, if I really, really want a horizontal line, I would draw a vertical. If I really wanted it to go the other way, I would draw a horizontal line, and that would produce a vertical gradient that's in there. Next tool that I'm going to use is not the blur tool. There's also sharpen and smudge that are in there, but we don't use those. Dodging and burning. Dodging is lightening. Burning is making something darker. Sometimes, let's say you have a girl who's got some lighter eyebrows, we might burn those a little bit. Again, we're trying not to spend a lot of time on these images for Yearbook, but still, you got a friend who, let's say, wants her eyes lightened a little bit, you know, maybe her teeth a little bit, you can dodge them, and of course you can burn in areas that are supposed to be dark. Next tool that we're going to use is not the pen tool. It's the horizontal type tool, which is the default. If you click and hold on it, it will give you options for vertical type. But if I go to horizontal, now the one thing you need to understand about the color for the text, you're not going to do this because that's for your paintbrush. You're instead going to go up here, pick the color that you want for your text, and then as soon as you click, it's going to go ahead and actually be your text that's over here. Again, move tool. You can move your text. You can also transform it. Control T. Hold Shift. It'll increase the size of it. As soon as you're done, you can hit Enter. And then there you go. There is your text. Vertical works the same way. It'll actually go from top to bottom or from bottom to top, depending on your orientation. If, let's say, I wanted this to be horizontal text going vertically, I could transform it. And then as I hover next to the edge over here, it actually gives me an option for rotating that text around. If you can't get it, let's say, exactly at 90 degrees up here, you can just type a -90 or +90, depending on the rotation. And that'll give you Enter key. That'll give you a actual straight line. So text, there you go. The next thing that we're going to tackle, not the rectangle tool or the hand tool, the zoom tool. I've already talked to you a little bit about foreground and background colors. Just remember you can switch them pretty easily, or you can just click on it and then it'll give you options. So the only last thing to talk about then would be the actual layer window. Again, make sure that window and layers is checked off. Layers work like sheets of glass, which means if you're editing something and you're not sure if you want to apply it to the main image, you're going to go ahead and create a new layer. The button that's right next to the trash can is called Create New Layer. As you create new layers, they all stack on top of each other and they're all opaque. Let's say on this layer that's ahead of this layer, I will say, oh, I really, really like, let's say, some blue paint on this. Okay, oh, I really, really like that. And let's say on this window right here, I really, really want some lighter blue. Okay, and then on this window right here, my last color, I'm going to go ahead and say, oh, I really, really want some pink. Okay, and let's say I send this to a client, and the client says, hey, I really, really like it all except for that light blue. Well, the cool thing is on the layer window, you got a couple different options. You can click on layer 2. If you change the opacity all the way down to 0, it means it's going to pretend like it's not even there. You can also click on this little eyeball tool. That will hide it. So seeing versus hiding. You could also, of course, delete the layer. If you delete the layer, trash can, and then hit delete, it'll ask you, do you want to do this? And you say yes. Again, if you make a mistake and say, oops, I didn't mean to delete that, Control Z will bring it back. Also, if you go like this, and let's say I want to work backwards, Control Alt Z, I can actually start stepping backwards to all those layers I created and all that paint, and I can go all the way back to the very beginning if I want to. Well, I hope that that was helpful. I hope you guys have fun working through your assignment. Let me know in class if you have any questions, and again, I hope this video was helpful to you, and I look forward to seeing you in class. Talk to you guys later. Bye-bye.